This video is going to focus on circumference, and circumference really is just all about circles. So how about we start off with a circle. A circle is defined as the set of all points that is going to be the same distance around one center point, which we're calling P. That distance is referred to as the radius. So the way you would name that circle would be based on the center. If the center is point P, you would call it circle P, and you can simply write it out like this, or symbolically you can draw a little circle with a dot in the middle, and then the letter P to denote what the center is. With the radius being from the center to any part of the circle, if you were to draw the entire distance across, that would be the diameter. Now for the circumference. The circumference is simply defined as the distance around a circle. So you could really think of it as just the perimeter. If you were to take the circumference, which we will call C, and if you were to divide it by its diameter, you would get the same value no matter what kind of circle you have, which is pi. Now pi is an irrational number. It's a number that runs on endlessly without any patterns or any repeats. Therefore, we define it in shorthand as rounded off. We defined it as 3.14. A fractional equivalent is 22/7. This is a fine number to use if you don't have a calculator. If you have a calculator, the decimal number is probably the easier way to go. If you multiply both sides here by d, what we get is a formula for the circumference. And that would be the circumference is equal to the diameter of the circle times pi. Now, because of the diameter's relationship to the radius, that being that it is twice as long, you could also incorporate this as a formula as well, the circumference being 2 times the radius times pi. Either formula works whenever dealing with the circumference. Let's do an example. Let's say that you have a circle that has a diameter of 12 inches. What is its circumference? State your answer in terms of pi and to the nearest hundredth. Recall that we have two formulas. You have one for the diameter and you have one for the radius. So let's choose one here. Since you were told the diameter, that tells us that using the diameter formula is a good idea. Okay, so now that we know what formula to use, let's go ahead and plug in our information. We're told the diameter is 12, so therefore we're going to plug in 12 right there. And that's it if you want the answer in terms of pi. We would call that an exact answer because we didn't have to round off the answer at all, and it is written in its simplest terms. However, pi is 3.14. If you were to replace that right here in for pi, this answer will no longer be exact, and that's why you're seeing these little squiggly lines to show us that we're approximately. If you were to do that multiplication, you'd get 37.68. So that would be the approximate answer, and the nearest hundredth we rounded off 2 decimal places. So this is your exact answer. This is your approximate answer. Now, which one is a better answer? It depends on the situation, but both are equally acceptable. Okay, let's try another. Let's determine the circumference of this circle, and just as before, we'll state our answer in terms of pi and to the nearest hundredth. Remember that we have two formulas, so we're going to choose the one that's more appropriate. Please note what we're given here in this picture. We're given the distance from the center to a part of the circle. That's the radius. Therefore, we'll focus on using this formula here. Just as before, we'll plug in our information. We know the radius is 7. Calculate 2 times 7 and you get 14. So that's the exact answer, or we've written the answer in terms of pi and that there's a pi in the answer. Now, if we were going to round off to the nearest hundredth, we would have to substitute in 3.14 into pi, or you can use 22/7. So instead of 14 times pi, that becomes 14 times 3.14. Multiply that and you get this. and that would be our approximate answer. For the record, if you were to use 22 over 7 instead of 3.14, you'd get 44 inches, and we wouldn't be able to use that to round to the nearest hundredth. So is 44 inches an acceptable answer? It in fact would be. Just understand that your ability to round off the nearest hundred is hampered by using this fraction. However, again, it's a great alternative to use if you do not have a calculator. Okay, let's do another. Let's say to determine the radius of the circle, knowing the circumference in advance. Remember, we have two formulas. Let's decide right now which one to use. Since we're talking about the radius, we'll use the second formula. Now let's go ahead and plug in our given information. We are told the circumference is 8 pi, so what we're going to do is we're going to replace that into here for the formula. So that's 8 pi is equal to 2r pi. Now we are solving for the radius r, so what we want to do is we want to isolate that variable. Since you have a 2 and you have a pi being multiplied to it, what we're going to do is we're going to divide them both out. This allows us to reduce out the right-hand side. So 2's go away and the pi's go away. On the left-hand side, both pi's are gone, and you're left with 8 divided by 2. So 4 is our answer. Let's do another one like that. Here you have a circle with a circumference of 20 meters. Determine its diameter. Now in this particular case, we're talking diameter here. Therefore, we'll use the first formula. In this particular problem, you are given the circumference. You're told that it is 20 meters. Therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to plug 20 in for C again. Okay, now let's go ahead and solve this. Since d, diameter, is the variable here, we're going to go ahead and divide out the pi that's being multiplied to it. So the pi's reduce out, and we get 20 over pi. Now since our units is in meters, we use meters, and this would be the exact answer, or the answer in terms of pi. But since we're going to be rounding here, we'll go ahead and substitute 3.14 in for pi. As soon as you substitute in 3.14, the answer is no longer exact. It is now a round off. So that becomes 20 over 3.14. Calculate that and we get 6.4 meters. So those are your two answers, and since we're going to be rounding off to the nearest tenth, this is the actual answer that we want. Let's do one final problem. Let's determine the perimeter of this object here. It's kind of capsule shaped. What you have essentially is just two measurements. The distance from here to here, and you also have a distance from the center to this part of the curve. Let's break this down into little pieces. Notice here on the left what you have is like a half circle. So what we're going to need is we're going to need to know this distance right there. Same thing on the right. Therefore, if you put those two pieces together, what you get is one complete circle. So what we're going to need to determine here is the distance around one entire circle. We of course know this distance as well. It's 14. Same thing across the top there. So to kind of piece this together, you have the left-hand side, then you have this part here which you know is 14, then back around, then another 14. So we have those two 14s, that's 14 plus 14, plus that complete circle, which is the circumference. Now I'm using 2r pi for the circumference. Again, remember we have two formulas, but I'm using the one for the radius because we are given the distance from the center of a circle to its side here. So you can kind of see that here, and if I were to put these two pieces together, it becomes a little more apparent. So the radius is 8. Let's go ahead and plug that into r. The two 14s give us 28, and then you get 2 times 8 pi, and multiply that and you get 16. And that would be it if we wanted the answer in terms of pi, or in other words, we wanted the exact answer. However, please remember that we are asked to determine this to the nearest hundredth. Therefore, let's go ahead and substitute 3.14 in for pi. So if we do that, we would wind up with 78.24. That is after you multiply it to 16 and then add the 28. This answer is approximate, and that's precisely what we want since we were to round this to the nearest hundredth anyhow. So again, if we were just simply asked to write this in terms of pi, we would leave it like this. But since we wanted to round this to the nearest hundredth, 78.24 works for us. That's it for this one. I'll see you next time.